Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, deportations of Afghan refugees are accelerating.
We were given a formal warning. Even though we had valid registration papers, they were cancelled, and we were issued exit documents with a deadline to leave.
We'll look at what's behind the decision to deport millions and whether Afghanistan is safe enough to return to. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take.
It's such a calamity and a difficult time that not speaking about it kills you. Speaking about it just lights the world on fire with how dark and sad it is. So I'm Obaidullah Baheer. I am a university lecturer in Afghanistan. I am based in Kabul.
Obaidullah, welcome to The Take. When we talk about Afghan refugees, who are we referring to and where are they living?
So when we say Afghan refugees, we're talking about one of the biggest refugee populations in the world. But majorly, this conversation is happening around refugees settled in Pakistan and Iran. We have refugees in other neighboring countries as well, but those numbers are not as significant or even close.
And this is a very specific distinction, refugee. These are people who are fleeing for a number of reasons. One is political, one is economic as well.
I mean, there were people who mocked us saying, Afghans are people who hate their country, who are willing to hang on to airplanes and fall to their deaths just to get out of their country. So my usual answer to them is park an airplane in any of the non-Western world's major cities and tell the people that they can go to the West, no questions asked, if they got on the plane. And then tell me if the last person leaving turns off the lights or not. So ultimately the major factor is economic. People leave their country to find a better life somewhere else. Yes, the changes in regime on August 15th was something we weren't prepared for.
Breaking news coming to us out of Afghanistan. As it stands this hour, Taliban fighters surround the capital, Kabul, and negotiations are underway to secure a transfer of power. There is a Taliban delegation inside the presidential palace.
The Afghan Republic fell in days to the Taliban, which meant that we had zero idea of what was to follow. But that's not where the major refugee population of Afghanistan stems from. Our major refugee crisis has developed since the Soviet invasion in the 1970s. And then after that, the 20 years of occupation, all the districts in Afghanistan that were bombed or the areas that were made unlivable for the people.
The Americans, like the Russians before them, have repeatedly killed civilians, turning the public against them.
So there are Afghan refugees all over the world, but by far the largest population is in Afghanistan's neighboring countries, specifically Pakistan and Iran. Can you just give us a sense of how they are living?
So I'll give you an anecdote. I'll tell you the story of this one woman who was a colleague and was in Pakistan and waiting to be processed to move abroad. But that process took forever. She'd come into Pakistan with a visa and her visa had expired. So she'd become a refugee. An undocumented refugee. And I remember every night we had to figure out a new place for her to stay with her family because they've put out public announcements asking people to report illegal Afghan refugees. There were nights that she spent in I can't call them jungles, but in the tree growths of Islamabad, areas where people wouldn't go, and they would just hide there for the night and then find a new place the next day. I could just imagine, Kevin, the level of dehumanizing, as if you're a criminal that has to hide from the people. And then the living conditions. You can't get jobs. You can only do informal labor. You're relying on remittance, but also being undocumented means you cannot officially rent property. You can't officially buy anything property-wise. And everything you have is up in the air. A lot of these people that are being sent back, they can barely bring anything that they have built for themselves there as well. That means your whole life is just a Tom and Jerry show where the Tom just wraps a rucksack on a stick and moves around. And Imagine a whole family living like that day in, day out. Your education prospects, your future prospects. There are no legal processes for these people to ever be naturalized. So you're always living in limbo. I think it's very important to constantly humanize refugees as well, because they're just so alien to our conception, especially if you're in the first world. The difference between you and a refugee is sheer luck. You're just fortunate that you were born in the country with the skin color, with the family that you are, and they were not, and they have to live and pay the price of larger politics that they had nothing to do with, and they're paying the ultimate price.
Absolutely. Okay. How has the situation in these two countries, Iran and Pakistan, shifted in recent times?
So Iran and Pakistan have historically been very closely allied with the Taliban. They've had security corporations with them, they've given them refuge, and so on and so forth. And they have a large influence on them even now. And that we see through the past 20 years of the NATO occupation of Afghanistan. Suddenly, when the Taliban come to power, at some point, both these countries realize that despite being patrons of the Taliban, they do not have a proxy installed in the country. So this government or this regime is acting independent of them, and you can see that with a lot of the rhetoric coming from Pakistan and Iran, where now they claim that certain Afghan refugees were working for Mossad during the U.S.-Israeli aggression towards Iran.
Our parents are from Afghanistan, but this is what we've always known as home. The anti-Afghan sentiment has hurt a lot. It's heartbreaking to see people sent away from the only home they've ever known.
And Pakistan keeps blaming every other attack that happens locally from the Taliban that are Pakistani local Taliban on Afghanistan as well. And that change has meant that they're now using the refugees as a political tool to exert pressure on the Afghan government and pushing them out in a way.
Was it always like what you just described, or has it gotten much worse?
I think the politicians and sometimes the pundits that comment on the situation, both in Iran and Pakistan, reiterate that they've been kind to Afghan refugees and they've been generous to host them for years and years. That misses out quite a few facts, right? It misses out how human life works. It doesn't matter if you've been the nicest person to me for 20 years. If you're a horrible human being to me at the end, you cancel out all your kindness by the way you end things. So there's that. But then there's also the idea that you got nothing out of these refugees, that they were just a burden to you. Economically speaking, there was some fiscal benefit to hosting these refugees.
But something has changed. Both of these countries have put in these new policies that are forcing them out in record numbers. Pakistan has this illegal foreigners repatriation plan, which is targeting 800,000 holders of Afghan citizen cards. These are people who were formally documented by Pakistan itself and have lived there for decades. On the Iran side, the government has told millions of Afghans to leave or face arrest after the deadline was July 6th, 2025. That deadline has come and gone. So what is the situation on the ground right now for these refugees?
The situation on the ground is that it doesn't matter, especially on Iran's side, it doesn't matter whether you are documented or not. They're picking you up and they're putting you on trucks. Because they're sending out such large numbers, the Taliban can't even receive them or process them. Meaning that you have no idea who's crossing. And then you later complain about security concerns. They're putting families on trucks and they're dropping them off across the border, not to a specific entity, just across the line, as if you're dumping people. And then they drive back. On the Pakistani side, they've constantly announced that there was going to be a gradual expulsion of refugees. They started with certain statuses and then moved on further, but then they halt it and then they say, okay, we'll talk about it. And then one day it's just going to be an announcement and you'd have to pack all of your life into whatever you can physically carry with you across the border into your country. When such large numbers come back to the country, these are refugees.
Ahsanullah's son misses his friends in school in Pakistan. For now, he's helping his father start again in Afghanistan, which he hopes will be their home forever.
In theory, the Taliban has said these people are welcome, but practically, I mean, politics aside, any country would struggle to take in this many people all at once. I mean, in purely practical terms, what is the government going to do with these people?
At least on the Pakistani side, I drove by the land border and they've built settlements there for the people to be processed. You have to process them, give them that official documentation, then discuss where they're going to go. There's a certain amount of money that the Taliban give them. There's a certain amount of money that different NGOs and the UN give these returnees. But they're peas. They're nothing. That amount of money can barely make you survive a month. And then on the Iran side, there is processing happening, but the numbers are so huge that it isn't happening fast enough. There's no way any countries, let alone Afghanistan, would be able to receive that many refugees. So it's overwhelming, just moving these people, figuring out a future for them. And look, the Taliban say that it's welcome, but I mean, if you ask me, it's difficult to put myself in their shoes, but I'd much rather face a difficult life in my own home, in my own country, than at the hands of someone else, you know?
We'll have more with Obaidullah after a break. Obaidullah, why don't we broaden this out a little bit? We're also seeing what appears to be this total collapse of the global refugee system. In the United States, the Trump administration terminated what's known as temporary protected status for Afghans. Meanwhile, in Germany, deportations of Afghans are also anticipated as the government seeks talks with the Taliban. The question is, what happened to the obligation that they have to these refugees that they've been hosting?
They don't have an obligation. At least that's what they think. Everything is a favor that they're doing to us. I wish the world operated on you break it, you own it.
The US trains soldiers and hands out weapons. The Soviets did the same, and when they pulled out, it led to a civil war.
They brought us here. You know, I mean, even beyond, Kevin, this last 20 years, you know, these people were your allies. You weren't taking the common Afghan to Europe or to the West. You were taking people who stood by you and worked with you. And somehow you just turn around. I mean, the United States has a history of this. Even in Saigon in Vietnam, they never stood by their allies. They let them suffer. And that's a precedent that teaches the world as to what the cost of collaborating with occupying forces is. Humanity-wise, you owed these people. These people stood in the line of fire for you. You turn your back on them. And it's not just Germany. It's not just the United States. It's the UK as well. The UK is having serious conversations about the refugee, with the Afghan protective plans that they had for resettlement. And I mean, look, I don't want to get too deep into this and become be my decolonial scholar self, but we didn't get here by accident. You know, my Afghans aren't poor by accident. Afghanistan was a thriving country 50, 60 years ago. Afghanistan was a thriving empire a few hundred years ago before the British came in. Then when the Soviet came in, what it did to our country, then what the United States occupation did to our country. And then you took half of them and you left the others behind. And then the ones that are there don't really have a process. Kevin, just a short anecdote. They took a CIA-trained unit called the 0 units. And these were 01, 02, 03, 04. These were different parts of Afghanistan. And what the CIA would do is identify people. Now, these people were prioritized and they were moved to the West. Now, imagine this. Most of these people barely speak English. And they barely have any skills. And what the United States did was, here's your documentation, here's a few months of food stamps, and here's a few months of rent, figure your life out. I remember sitting with them in South Bend, and they're telling me, listen, we've run out of the rent, we've run out of the food stamps, we worked at a factory, and now the factory owners are telling us because we don't have the language skills required, they will fire us. The only other thing we know how to do is fight or drive. And we cannot even get driver's licenses because we don't speak the language.
The decision to deport, to change policy seems so arbitrary. These governments, they know about the Taliban. They disagree with their policies. They also know that Afghanistan remains the world's largest humanitarian crisis. I mean, who gets to decide when Afghanistan is safe enough to return?
The United States, after Trump came to power, suspended all of its contribution to refugee programs around the world. US aid was suspended. World Food Program contributions, their contribution to the UN has almost been reduced to zero. That has meant that aid money allocated to Afghanistan has reduced. The Swedes apparently are going to shut down some aid for Afghanistan very soon as well. So just to say that the aid money available is just so much lesser than it was in the past 20 years. And then the hunger, the famine levels in Afghanistan, they didn't start today. These numbers existed during the US occupation as well, right? By the end of the day, there is so much pressure because there is the minimal resources, all while these countries are turning a blind eye to all these refugees being sent back into the country. They're sentencing them to a horrible life without caring or taking responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, this is happening simultaneously. Germany resumed deportations while the EU pledged 161 million euros in humanitarian aid for 2025.
There's very little moral credibility left. The United States sat down in the UN while hosting Netanyahu in DC, who's accused of war crimes. They tell the UN that they're not going to support Afghanistan because the Taliban don't have a good record on human rights. And then while you're deporting people, while you're ignoring your responsibility and your part in the problem and how we got here, right? It's just a sad excuse.
What has changed? Because what strikes me is that there's this commonality between the political environments in places like Pakistan and Iran that there are in places like the UK, in the United States, and it's all against refugees. It's all against Afghan refugees. What is binding these dissimilar political systems in their antipathy towards these people?
I think, especially in the West, the media just hype up Afghanistan as such a lost cause. So it dried out the well for aid or desire to engage with Afghanistan and its people. And when the common person thinks it's just a lost cause and we can't do anything short of dropping bombs, then the government gets a lot of leeway to do things that otherwise would not have been done. And then specifically on the Pakistan and Iran, the refugees have always been used as a right to interfere in the country's internal politics. And now they're being used as tools of political pressure, scapegoating on Afghans, poisoning the mentality of the common citizens in their own countries.
We must never dehumanize Afghan people. The claims that Afghans are terrorists are false. We hope these dark days will pass and that peace and justice will return to our shared homeland.
That's the worst thing you can do, is when you ruin all the years of people-to-people contact, the camaraderie, and that's going to create so much instability in this region. And I don't think they're prepared for it.
The international community seems caught between security concerns and humanitarian obligations. What are the long-term implications if current deportation trends continue unchecked?
You have more than enough literature of fragile states and how they become brewing grounds for radicalism. You call it anti-Western sentiment. We're resilient people. We've gone through very difficult times in our past. We'll suffer it on our own, but at least the West should never then turn around and claim moral superiority when this was their stance.
Thank you so much for coming on The Take today.
Thank you for having me on, Kevin.
And that's The Take. If you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlist. That's where you're going to find all of our recent content, which is updated regularly, so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English. We will see you tomorrow.